Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Sterning with American Resiliency. Today we're reaching out to all of our friends in Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands, sharing your 2050 climate forecast. This forecast is based on the National Climate Assessment, which was just updated, and you can read it here. National Climate Assessment was just released in November of 2023. It represents the highest consensus climate science available. We won't receive an update on this until at least 2027. Your tax dollars have paid for this. It's the best information we're going to get. Today, we're breaking it down for you in the Pacific Islands. Here's what we're talking about when we're talking about the US affiliated Pacific Islands. Everybody on this map, the people of this region know things look serious in terms of climate. Y'all are getting ready. There's huge energy, grassroots energy, policy level energy, and tremendous mobilization to adapt to climate change in the Pacific Islands. There's a lot of knowledge and resource sharing happening. So, for many of you in the islands, and there are 1.9 million people in this region, the forecast may not be news to you. But for the rest of us, we all need to understand what you are facing and why it's so important that we not only build climate resilience on the mainland, but that we also work to cut emissions. Because the forecast that we're all looking at, it's pretty fixed for 2050, but there's a lot of variation for what 2100 will be like based on what we do in the next 10 years. The islands need us all to work together for their protection in 2100. Let's start by talking about sea level rise in this context. There's a fair amount of sea level rise that's locked in at this point. We can't refreeze Greenland's glaciers. Even if we figure out how to scrub carbon from the air, sea level rise is a problem we need to deal with. Here's what we're looking at with sea level rise in the US affiliated Pacific Islands. This is the primary figure related to sea level rise in the NCA5. Consensus science is projecting probably a foot to a foot and a half of increase in sea level rise by 2050. That's going to have a major impact on many of today's beaches. After 2050, sea level rise is projected to increase further, with 4 feet not out of the range of probability by the end of the century. It should be noted the fifth National Climate Assessment does not include climate data from the second half of 2023, where we've been seeing a lot more sea ice than expected lost. It would not be a shocker if we ended up with more sea level rise than these estimates. The current sea level rise estimates, looking at a 4 foot by 2100, that would destroy almost 60% of Guam's built environment. With the sea rising, there's also the issue of salt water getting into the groundwater. Freshwater resources are always a challenge on islands, but these challenges will intensify this century, not only due to potential saltwater contamination, but NOAA is expecting decreases in rainfall to the region. We'll look more at that in detail in a few moments. As many of the islands are projected to get even less rain, they should also expect less surface water in streams. So these freshwater issues are serious, and they're related to food security concerns on the islands. Will you be able to get reasonably affordable food on the islands? Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands, right now, they import a lot of their food. This drying trend is going to make it more challenging to grow food on the islands, so there will be even more dependence on imports. And the warming oceans will also impact traditional fisheries. It's estimated that many traditional fisheries, the fish will have moved. They'll be out of traditional range by 2030. That's very significant. So your ability to engage in both regenerative food systems and in traditional indigenous food systems here on the islands, they're going to be very strained from the perspective of both land and sea. Talking in a little more detail about rainfall. In the NCA5, we see substantial internal contradiction, or at least not easily reconcilable evidence in this report regarding rainfall trends in Hawaii. In Chapter 4, which covers impacts to the water cycles, we see many times in this figure, but in many others, that Hawaii is looking at overall a pretty extreme drought trend. When we look at reality, we have seen Hawaii facing a drought trend, which has led to such terrible fires, such tragic fires this year. And the degree of wildfire in the islands, I think many people don't realize how much fire we're talking about, how much area is burned in the islands. We have a frame of reference with those fires in the western US since 2002 related to pine beetles. You can see that if you look at land area burned in the islands, wildfire is a substantial problem. However, in the section of the NCA5 on Hawaii, Chapter 30, we see this figure, which shows more rain coming by 2100. I'm not sure how to parse this information, but I want to show you this conflict and get into it a little bit more. It's unusual to see such intense contradiction within a consensus report. Perhaps it implies intense change over time in the models, because you can see in this figure that the bands of increased rain are quite narrow, and that's contradiction. It's looking out to the 2100 forecast. So there's consensus, the 2050 drought trend, and then 2100 really wet. It's unclear. Perhaps the prediction is that the islands are going to fall out of this precipitation band for 2050 and be back in band by 2100. That would be a way to square the circle here. I remain troubled, though, by the intensity of contradiction in the models. Intense drought and intense prediction for increased rain in the same thing. That's very difficult to build resilience in a scenario where you have to prepare for both extreme abundance of water and extreme reduction. Well, overall rainfall is likely to decrease. There's consensus. It's likely to decrease by 2050. There are other changes to the weather that are worth noting. Tropical cyclone patterns are likely to shift north, which will probably bring more cyclones to this region by 2050. There's also an expecting doubling in frequency of La Nina and El Nino events. These events come with the characteristic weather changes. The events will be occurring more often. Both La Nina and El Nino and individual events within those are likely to be more extreme. The picture comes together to suggest that freshwater resources will really need to be prioritized for the stability of the islands, and that many ecosystems are going to change as they become gradually drier. In the oceans, we're also looking at changes to the ecosystem. I'm very sad to report that NOAA has projections for the onset of annual coral bleaching in this region. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands is likely to see annual coral bleaching events, widespread bleaching events, begin around 2035. In Guam, annual coral bleaching events may start in some areas by 2036 and become widespread, become year-to-year major bleaching events by 2038. In American Samoa, NOAA is projecting widespread annual coral bleaching events around 2040. For the Hawaiian Islands, annual bleaching events will begin in the mid-2030s around the bigger islands. They'll be widespread by 2040. This figure is the only one I'm presenting that is from the 4th National Climate Assessment. There has been no update given on onset of anticipated widespread bleaching events in the 5th National Climate Assessment. These major bleaching events will have ecosystem-wide impacts. By 2050, there's an anticipated decline of at least 10% in the greater Pacific fisheries. That decline could go to 40% reduction in biomass, they're predicting by 2100 if we don't check emissions now. At this point, it looks like a 10 to 20% decline is locked in. I would rather see that than a 40% decline. And I want to note there are heroic efforts underway to save the corals through farming, through selective breeding to increase heat tolerance. There is a bottom line here. We need to stop heating up the ocean if we want any chance of preserving some of these ecosystems. Wrapping this all up, we are looking at a very serious situation. But the people of this region are extremely organized. They are responding, they're adapting to the changes that are coming. But these communities are disproportionately vulnerable to the choices the rest of us make. If we don't reduce emissions now, if we keep doing what we're doing, we will cause our fellow Americans tremendous suffering, tremendous loss, and to all of us, to everyone, if we lose these places. These are beautiful places with species that exist and can exist nowhere else. We impoverish ourselves, we impoverish our world when we lose these things. The people of this region, they've got what it takes to handle local resiliency issues, but the choices we all make are important. Those of us on the mainland, we need to work together to cut emissions. The people of Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands are working hard to save their homelands, but they can't do it alone. We all need to work together, or the seas will continue to rise. This is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency signing out. Please like and subscribe and help get the message out there. There is hope. We can prepare for what's coming. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks for listening in. That was our first NCA5 updated state-level climate forecast. Big thanks to everyone who supported the project, helping us get this far. It's thanks to your support, to your gifts of time, of money, of your many efforts to spread the word that we're making progress on this project, helping all Americans understand the consensus science around the changes coming to their homes by 2050 so we can all get ready. Thanks everyone for all you do. And if you want to come to the community chat, we've got Focus on Your On the Ground Actions coming up on December 17th at 2 p.m. Central. Hope to see you there and talk with you soon.